The Germans couldn't stop this B-17's secret weapon until he destroyed all 17 planes. It is October 10, 1943. High above the occupied fields of Europe, the sky is a canvas of crystalline blue, scarred by the white vapor trails of the bloody 100th, the 100th Bombardment Group. On this day, the target is the railway bridges and cathedral spires of Münster, Germany. To the men of the 8th Air Force, Münster represents the hornet's nest, a fortress of Flak and Focke-Wulfs. Among the waves of B-17 flying fortresses is a ship that would defy the odds of aerial warfare. This is the story of Lieutenant Robert Rosie Rosenthal and his B-17, Rosie's Riveters. On this day, the secret weapon wasn't a piece of technology, but the indomitable spirit of a single crew. Out of 13 aircraft from the 100th that took off from Münster, only one would return. To understand the sheer magnitude of the Münster raid, one must understand the state of the combined bomber offensive in late 1943. The Allies were locked in a desperate struggle for air superiority over Europe. The theory of unescorted daylight precision bombing was being tested to its absolute bloody limit. The P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings of the era simply did not have the range to protect the big friends, the B-17s, all the way to the heart of the Reich. Lieutenant Robert Rosenthal was not your typical pilot. A former lawyer from Brooklyn, he had enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor. By the time he arrived at Thorpe Abbotts in England, the 100th Bomb Group had already earned its grim nickname, the Bloody 100th. Their casualty rates were astronomical. In the cockpit of his B-17F, serial number 4230713, Rosenthal was a man of quiet intensity. His secret weapon was a combination of tactical genius, a refusal to break formation, and an almost supernatural calm under fire. The mission briefing at 0400 hours on October 10th was grim. The target was the center of Münster. Unlike previous missions targeting industrial outskirts, this was a strike at the heart of the German rail infrastructure, designed to disrupt the movement of troops to the Eastern Front. The crews knew what this meant. They would be flying directly over some of the most concentrated anti-aircraft batteries in the world. As the B-17s taxied down the oil-stained runways of Thorpe Abbotts, the ground crews watched in silence. They knew the math. The 100th was sending 13 planes. The 95th and 390th bomb groups would make up the rest of the 13th Combat Bomb Wing. Thousands of gallons of high-octane aviation fuel and 500-pound demolition bombs strained the wings of the fortresses as they clawed into the English sky. Rosenthal sat at the controls, his hands steady on the yoke, checking the manifold pressure and the steady hum of the 4 Wright Cyclone engines. The strategic situation was dire. The Luftwaffe had developed new tactics, head-on attacks. German pilots, led by veterans of the Eastern Front, would dive at the B-17s from 12 o'clock high, aiming for the unarmored nose and the pilot's seats. They were no longer just trying to damage the planes, they were trying to decapitate the formations. By 1100 hours, the formation crossed the coast of the Netherlands. The little friends, the escorting P-47s, shook their wings in a silent salute and turned back. Their fuel was low. The B-17s were now alone in the lion's den. The first signs of trouble appeared as black smudges on the horizon. Flak. The German 88mm guns were ranging them with terrifying accuracy. Rosie's Riveters bucked as nearby explosions sent jagged shards of steel, shrapnel, tearing through the thin aluminum skin of the fuselage. The air temperature dropped to 40 degrees below zero. Inside the B-17, the crew huddled in their sheepskin-lined flight suits, their breath freezing on their oxygen masks.
At 14:15 hours, the real nightmare began. The German radar controllers had vectored in over 200 fighters, Bf-109s and Fw-190s. But these weren't just standard fighters. Some were carrying R-4M rockets and underwing cannons. The Luftwaffe's objective was simple: total annihilation of the 100th Bomb Group. Rosenthal watched through the plexiglass as the lead plane of the 100th, Marge and Parge, piloted by Major John Buck Egan, was bracketed by fire. One by one, the planes around Rosenthal began to fall. The Royal Flush erupted in flames. The Careful Virgin spun out of control, its wings sheared off by a direct flak hit. The sky was a chaotic swirl of tracers, oil smoke, and falling debris. "Enemy fighters at 6 o'clock, 12 o'clock. They're coming from everywhere," the intercom screamed. The B-17's secret weapon, the interlocking fields of fire from its 50 caliber machine guns, was being tested like never before. Rosenthal's gunners were firing until their barrels glowed cherry red. The smell of cordite filled the cockpit, thick and suffocating. By 1500 hours, the situation reached a breaking point. The 100th Bomb Group had been effectively erased from the sky. Of the 13 planes that had started the run, only Rosenthal's Rosie's Riveters and 2 others remained in a ragged, desperate formation. Then the 2 others were hit. Rosenthal looked to his left and saw a B-17 explode in a fireball so bright it blinded him for a second. To his right, another fortress dropped its nose and spiraled toward the earth, no chutes appearing. Rosie's Riveters was now entirely alone, a single B-17 against the entire weight of the German Jagdkorps. The Luftwaffe pilots, smelling blood, converged on the lone bomber. 2 engines were hit. The number 1 engine was windmilling, its oil pressure dropping to 0. The number 3 engine was smoking, losing power rapidly. The intercom was a cacophony of pain. The tail gunner was wounded, his legs peppered with 20mm cannon fragments. The waist gunners were slipping on spent brass casings and blood as they swung their guns to meet the next wave of Focke-Wulfs. The secret weapon of this B-17 was now being revealed. It was the sheer, stubborn refusal of Robert Rosenthal to die. He pushed the remaining engines to their absolute limits, weaving the massive bomber in a combat box maneuver that shouldn't have been possible for a plane of its size. A 20mm shell punched through the cockpit, narrowly missing Rosenthal's head and shattering the instrument panel. Glass and metal sprayed the cabin. The wind howled through the jagged holes, a scream that matched the roar of the dying engines. They were still miles from the target. The logical choice was to turn back, to jettison the bombs and dive for the coast, but Rosenthal stayed on course. "We're going in," he told the crew over the flickering intercom. "Hold your positions." The turning point came over the very heart of Münster. As the flak intensified, the German fighters pulled away to avoid their own anti-aircraft fire. This was the window. Despite the damage, despite the blood on the floorboards and the 2 dying engines, Rosenthal held the plane level. "Bombs away!" The B-17 leapt upward as the heavy load of 500-pounders left the bay. The secret weapon, the payload, was delivered. But the struggle was only half over. They had to get home. As they turned west, the German fighters returned for the kill. They saw a crippled, smoking lone wolf and expected an easy victory. But what happened next would become legendary. Rosenthal began a series of daring maneuvers. He used the clouds for cover, popping out only to let his gunners rake the pursuing fighters. The crew, inspired by their pilot's defiance, fought with a ferocity that stunned the Luftwaffe pilots. The ball turret gunner, though his oxygen was leaking, stayed in his bubble, calling out targets with ice-cold precision. The secret was that the Germans couldn't stop a crew that had decided they were already dead. With nothing left to lose, they became the most dangerous thing in the sky. One FW-190 came in for a belly attack. The ball turret gunner shredded its engine, sending it into a flaming spin. Another Bf-109 tried a head-on pass. The nose gunners met it with a wall of lead, shattering its canopy. Through sheer determination and mechanical luck, Rosie's Riveters reached the Dutch border. The German fighters, low on fuel and ammunition, finally peeled away. The lone B-17, riddled with over 2,000 holes, its tail shredded and 2 engines dead, was over the North Sea. When the lone B-17 finally limped over the English coast, the controllers at Thorpe Abbotts couldn't believe their eyes. They had been tracking the mission on radar and had assumed the 100th was gone. One solitary blip remained. Rosenthal brought the battered ship down on the grass, the tires shredded, the brakes failing. As the engines finally died, a heavy silence fell over the airfield. Ground crews rushed to the plane, expecting to find a graveyard. Instead, they found Rosenthal and his crew climbing out, exhausted, bleeding, but alive.
The cost of the Münster raid was staggering. Of the 13 planes the 100th sent out, 12 were destroyed. 121 men were missing or killed. Only the 10 men of Rosie's Riveters returned. Robert Rosenthal would go on to fly a total of 52 missions, far exceeding the required 25. He was shot down twice, escaped twice, and earned the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, and the Distinguished Flying Cross. He later served as a prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials, ensuring that the regime that tried to knock him out of the sky faced justice on the ground. The historical significance of the Münster raid cannot be overstated. It forced the Allies to realize that unescorted bombing was a suicide mission, leading to the rapid development of the P-51 Mustang. But more importantly, it became the defining symbol of the Bloody 100th, a testament to the courage of the men who flew into the jaws of death when the odds were zero. The story of Rosie's Riveters remains etched in the annals of the U.S. Army Air Forces. It serves as a reminder that in the heat of battle, technology and numbers are often secondary to the resilience of the human spirit. Robert Rosenthal didn't just fly a plane, he led a crew through hell and brought them back, even when the sky was filled with 17 planes worth of destruction. Casualty reports from that day list the 100th as having suffered a 92% loss rate. Yet, because of that one surviving crew, the spirit of the group lived on to fly again, eventually contributing to the total liberation of Europe. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to Past History Tales as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to light.